I've certainly started bodies of work that I just have really worked at and thought, this is going nowhere. It's not holding my interest, and just saying, wait a minute, it's this landscape that I'm so awed by. And what can I do with it that's different and hasn't been seen before? And that's another question I think photographers need to ask themselves. How can I stand out? What can I do that I haven't seen before? What can I do that sets me apart? I mean, in the commercial world, in the fine art world, in whatever world of image making you're in, standing out, standing apart really has to happen for you to advance.
Hey, welcome to episode 408 of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we are chatting with fine art photographer Elena Dorfman about pushing past the self-doubt when starting a new photo project. Now, this episode is brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one, way better than Google Drive solution to deliver and even sell your photos online. You can grab your own free forever CloudSpot account with 10 gigabytes of photo storage for free over at deliverphotos.com. Now, one of the questions that I ask all of the guests at the end of an interview is, do you know anybody who you think would be a good fit to come onto the podcast? And this, honestly, this one question has really helped open up my universe of known photographers so much more than if I was just, searching a hashtag and seeing who possibly comes up. So when I asked that question to Dan Milner last year, without skipping a beat, he said Elena Dorfman. He said her fine art work with her photojournalist background creates some of the most interesting and compelling work he has seen. If it doesn't pique your interest, I don't know what does, After you look at Elena's website, it is really a fascinating look at what seems like so many different varied types of projects, everything from just straight photography to video work and different types of compositions. She really is a creative engine. And in this interview, we talk a lot about creating projects with personal meaning and how to handle the self-doubt that often comes along with it. Oh, also, stick around to the end of the episode. I want to share something new with you that I'm trying out that is designed to help you actually take action on what you learn from our guests in each episode. So again, stick around for the end of the interview where I will share that with you. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's podcast interview with Elena Dorfman. Elena, the first question that I have for you, I just want to know, when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
I knew photography was going to play an important role in my life, really, when I was a teenager. So my father gave me his Rolleiflex camera and we would go out shooting. I grew up in Boston, in the Boston area. And so we would go out and shoot film and he would take me all over Boston. And I've really not done anything else since. Everything has been photo related. So that would be for the last 27 years, something like that.
But why? What was it? I mean, plenty of kids get a camera. They go out and take photos.
Yeah.
What was it about the result, or was it the process?
Probably both. I mean, I've always considered myself a bit of an anthropologist, a sort of cultural or social anthropologist. So I think it allowed me a way to, access, like other photographers, it allows you a way to access worlds that you wouldn't necessarily have. I can't say why I took the camera in my hand and then sort of never let it go, but that's the way it went. And again, I think it just allowed me access into other people's lives with a bit of with an object in front of me, even though it's always very personal and we're always talking and connecting, because that's super critical in photography, especially if you're photographing people. And yeah, I think it just allowed me a way in.
So from an early age, were you trying to do more in-depth portraits aside from just snapshots that most teens do?
Well, no, as a teenager, absolutely not. I was just sort of figuring it out, photographing my friends, photographing my immediate environment, my family, my home, school, etc., the usual. However, when I went to college, that's when I really started to think about projects that could be more meaningful to me.
Did you go to college for photography?
I went to a liberal arts college, Sarah Lawrence in New York, but it has a great photography program. Mm-hmm. Doug Baz, Susan Jahota, Joel Sternfeld. And it was there that I really solidified, not my practice, but the idea that I wanted to continue. And the way in then, now we're going way back, is I had quite a powerful experience as a young adult with illness, a very long and pretty traumatic. I was diagnosed with cancer when I was a teenager. So I went through really a long period of treatment. And when I finally had some distance from that, which was when I was in college, I discussed the possibility of doing a long-term project about my experience. However, it was not my experience. It was the experiences of other teens and their families who were going through treatment for cancer, because at that time, nothing else existed. It's a very weird stage. You're very in between. It started when I was in college, that project, which became my first published book when I was about 26. And so it was kind of early, but I had a very specific goal and target. I wanted to explore that which had happened to me, but was also happening to other people.
What did you hope to accomplish from that? Just to bring awareness to others?
Oh, yeah. And it turned out to be enormously successful. And I was asked to lecture. I was flown all over the country to talk to doctors and nurses and medical social workers and medical providers about how you handle young adults who are going through treatments for cancer and their families. It's a very complex process, and it's life or death. That started in college. So that was like maybe 6 or 7 years after I picked up the camera. And then from there, I went into journalism, starting at the San Francisco Chronicle, and then into magazines and into fine art. But that was my first in-depth photography book where I was able to explore people and stories, and it was both photographic and interview based. So the book, which is called The C Word, I don't even think it's in print anymore, had in-depth very documentary journalistic style photographs, because I followed the lives of 5 teenagers over many years and became very close to them and their families. And they revealed a lot to me about their experiences. So that was the beginning.
Wow, that is incredible. I think most new photographers, myself included, we just take a bunch of photos of our own personal life and they just kind of live and die on a hard drive. Did you know from the beginning that this had to be a book?
I think I did. Yes. I knew from the beginning it had to be a book. And this was also in the day when books were a regular outlet, a regular vehicle for photographs and photographers. Now, not so much, unless you have a substantial amount of money to bring with you, or if it's self-published, of course, which is a great option. But yeah, I knew it was going to be a book. I specifically posed it to the college. I want this to be a book. Can I take my last year, a section of my last year, and devote it to this? They said, yes, you can. So I had enormous support from Sarah Lawrence. And then it took me a while to find my way in. So I had the idea, which is for new photographers, very critical. I had a real burning desire to do something specific. And then I put it in action. I wrote a plan, what I wanted it to be, how I wanted to explore it, and I had to present it to somebody. So I think if you don't have someone to present it to, it's often really helpful to present it to yourself. You write something that says, I want to do this. This is the reason why I want to do this. This is how I'm going to get it done. I think that's a really interesting way to begin a project. Again, if you don't have accountability to somebody else, you can have it to yourself. And sometimes writing it out helps you clarify it, or as you're working through the project, you can clarify through writing. And an interesting segue from that book is I started it in New York, and then I went back to Boston to continue working where I was treated, which was Mass General Hospital, because that was an easy in for me. I could go to them and say, I was just here for many years. Can I come back and connect with some of the kids in the same department where I was? So, of course, you have to jump through some bureaucratic channels. Of course, it's a private situation. They said yes. And I worked with their social workers to help locate kids. From there, once that stint in Boston was done, I went to Northern California to see if I could find some people at a place that had been suggested to me, actually Oakland Children's Hospital. And that instigated my move from the East Coast to the West. So I came to work at Oakland Children's Hospital on this book, and I never left California. I now live in Los Angeles, not San Francisco, but I was in San Francisco for many years. Also, I worked on the book at Oakland Children's Hospital, and then when I was done with the book, they hired me for at least 10 years to photograph their in-house needs. So I was their kind of in-house photographer too, which led to paid work and more experience. So there's always a synergy around a project you start and where it goes from there, and what opportunities can be kind of mined from there as well.
So before we move on, can you tell me a little bit more about this document that you wrote Do you do this now for every project that you do? And what sorts of things do you cover in this document if you were to just present it to yourself?
I think I did it earlier on when my projects were more documentary based, but I do find myself now going back to notes a lot and going back to sort of journaling and first thing in the morning coming into the studio and writing what I'd like to accomplish and really letting my thoughts just flow. I know a lot of people must do this, so I can kind of find new revelations maybe about it. So that book, I was asking my school to give me a particular period of time. I needed to say, this is what the project, it was a brief overview. This is my idea. These are the steps I'm going to need to take to get it done. This is how much time I'm going to need to get it done. And it was just a basic outline of the project. And I do suggest that for documentary projects. It might not be everybody's thing, but I have found that it's been helpful to just state what I need, maybe the time frame I'd like to get it done in, because with self-guided, self-motivated projects, the time frame can be sort of unending. And if you're working on a documentary project that takes all kinds of different forms, you want to kind of live your way into those forms to make sure it's organic and thoroughly achieved. But I think having a basic outline is super helpful for any project.
Yeah, of course. I know this is very technical, but an architect wouldn't show up without some sort of plan to get something done, and I wouldn't go on a road trip without a map of where it is that I need to go.
Exactly.
So with a road trip, I know that it was successful if I get to my destination. With architecture, I know that it's successful if I see a house. How are you quantifying what success looks like in a project?
Good question. I think the success would be, did I make the pictures I wanted to make? Did they exceed my expectations? Did I take pictures that were new to me or that really pushed my own abilities? Did I connect with people in the way I wanted to? Did I cover all the ground? So from that first book, The C Word, I published maybe 4 other books. And so I'm thinking about how those progressed.
Because they slowly started to turn away from specifically just documentary work, correct?
Right. But I'm thinking of a book that I did that was published in 2005 called Still Lovers. And I went from, it's a little bit of a jump. I went from not cancer patients, but I did. That was the beginning. And then moved to 10 years later, maybe 20 years later, moved to 2004, right? To a body of work that was started in 1999. And that was a book called Still Lovers. And I referenced that book, which was a 5-year documentary project, portrait documentary project. I referenced that book because after 5 years, I knew I was done. Like, it's something I just said, I'm done. The absolute interest I have in this is I see that I've explored it. It's been the most fascinating project, but I'm done. So I think you have to listen to yourself. So much about photography is instinct. It's instinct what leads you into a project. It's instinct what keeps you there. It's instinct that causes you to, asks you, forces you, whatever, inspires you to take a picture. You don't really have anything else except instinct, I have grown to believe. So if my instinct says, follow this path, follow this project, I do. If the instinct says, you're done, then I listen to that.
That's fascinating. Especially in a world where today I feel like we're told so much that we have to niche down into something very specific. And if you go too far from that, you could be ostracized. People won't take it seriously, all this stuff. And yet when I look at your body of work, you've gone in many different directions. Is that a personal feeling within you that says, I know that I'm not, that, you know, that maybe I was doing documentary work before, but now I want to focus on urban landscapes here, you know?
Right.
How do you get that confidence in yourself to do that?
Well, I can tell you about that trajectory because it is significant. And I'll just be as brief as possible about that. So I started with the documentary book, The C Word, as we've been talking about. I then went on to do a second book in that realm with a co-author. Then, as I mentioned, I was asked to then work for the San Francisco Chronicle. So for many years, I did a lot of journalistic work for them, documentary journalistic work for them. It was a natural segue for me to move from newspapers to magazines because I wanted to take more control of the picture. I didn't want to necessarily just walk into something and cover it. I wanted to light it. I wanted to interact more. I wanted to be more in control. So that was a natural progression from newspapers to magazines. So for many years, I worked as a portrait photographer for major magazines all over the world. That was another transition. The magazine world led me to find the dolls. So without my working for a magazine to do a story on the dolls, I would never have said, this is so interesting. I'm going to see if I can do this myself. Once the story published, can I take it over and explore this on my own? I'm paying for it. I'm discovering it. I'm driving this. So that was a natural progression from the magazine piece that came out to the book. When the book of Still Lovers came out, people in the art world started to take notice. The magazine and the art world can often be, there's a lot of synergy between them. Mm-hmm. A little bit less now than there used to be. But when magazines were a thing, you could find a lot of artists who were doing pictures for high-end magazines as well. And you still can. For a long time, so Still Lovers came out, and then it was exhibited all over the world. And I was still working for magazines. So I was sort of having this dual life of the fine art life and still being hired by magazines. Eventually, I realized that it was too much for me to try to do both. My brain was too split. And I couldn't really be photographing for, say, People magazine if I was then being asked to do major commissions. They just didn't seem to line up. It was mostly about my energy and time and commitment. And I was more drawn into the fine art world after a period of time. So focusing on People, which I had done after Still Lovers, I did another book called Fandomania, Characters in Cosplay, which was purely portrait driven in a studio that was built on location. And I can talk about that later if you'd like. And then I went to the Midwest where I was spending some time, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, which was a totally new realm for me. I was spending a lot of time there and I needed something to do. So I was there for personal reasons. And I decided to visit the quarries because they were radically different landscapes for me. I grew up on the East Coast. I've lived on the West Coast. The Midwest was like an unknown territory. So that's always very exciting to go someplace new. And for months and months, I was exploring the rock quarry scene, but specifically the people who jump. So I was focused on people. Mm-hmm. And I shot thousands of pictures of people flying through the air, jumping into the quarries. And after a period of time, I liked them. In fact, I still love that work. I call them the fallers. They're just people in space kind of moving. And I photographed the milieu of the quarry people, like the groups that gather to jump. So again, it was like a sociological exploration, as I had done with Still Lovers and Fandomania, and thought I would do with the quarry jumpers. But after a period of time, I was so moved by the landscape itself that I shifted my perspective and thought, this is a landscape I really want to explore. Also, at that time, the book was published in 2013, so I probably started that project in 2012. We were becoming more and more aware of environmental issues, of kind of big industry on the environment, on just the environment was becoming more and more important, and to me as well. And I'd already had 20-something years of photographing people. So I began to explore the rock quarry landscapes of those three states. And that turned into a new trajectory of looking at the landscape in different ways.
And so in seeing the quarries, in seeing landscapes in these different ways, that's what led you to your LA River project as well, Sublime?
Oh, yes. So Empire Falling was the rock quarry book. Mm-hmm. And I just will say one thing. So I literally walked the landscape for 2 years. So about every month I would go back to the Midwest, find a new quarry located on Google Earth, GPS, asked friends who knew them. It was a real system of helping me get to these places because you don't just, some of them you have to hike in miles to find them and you have to locate them in very weird ways. And the lands are often not public. So you have to kind of jump fences and was really like an explorer. And I walked and shot very quotidian, very normal pictures of landscape. And I thought, okay, I've got this, but I'd like to do something different with it. I don't want to just take normal quarry pictures. And also there's a very well-known photographer named Edward Bertinsky who'd done lots of pictures on quarries. And I certainly didn't want to follow what he did. And that's when I came up with the technique of collaging them, of layering them. So that's something people do a lot today. But at the time, these are all hundreds of individual files that are put into that are hundreds of individual images that contribute to each photograph that was made. So I would often just print out page after page after page of 3x5 images, cut them out, and then start to actually manually, physically on my table, put them together to lead me, because I couldn't go into the computer and look at 20,000 images of quarries and know how I was going to figure it out. It was extremely important to be able to reference them physically, like I do on my back wall with a film I'm working on now. If I have those small cutouts, I can make connections. I can start thinking about them. And those little paper templates turned into very large scale, very elaborate photographs that were shown again all over the world and in books. The LA River was a continuation of that process. It had taken me a long time to figure that process out. So the LA River, again, I walked the LA River for almost 2 years, very frequently, accumulating pictures, thinking about the river. It's 50 miles. So thinking about how I wanted to put it together and use the same system of collaging. So that was a natural progression again.
I see. I really appreciate you breaking that down, because I think on paper, just looking at your body of work, looking at everything that I could find online, it does kind of seem all over the place. But I love this more organic path. It's like you were led here and you also explored the things that interest you. And it wasn't just jumping from one thing to another, to another, to another. But they all do make sense. That is great.
I mean, they have to too, because I'm asked to write about the work a lot. I mean, there have to be statements about the work that galleries can share with their collectors. I have to be able to articulate it. And someone who is a writer or a critic or a gallerist has to say, I see the trajectory. I see that you're now, for example, with the dolls. I mean, the dolls were so material. You could see their seams. You could see the lines. Well, that's the same thing I'm doing now. You can see the seams. You can see the line. Materiality is the connector through almost all the bodies of work.
Wow. I'm going to have to go back and look at some of your images and look at it through that lens, I suppose. I like that a lot. I want to ask a little bit more about projects and I guess the idea of the project itself, because I know at times, say, when you have an idea for something that you want to go after and you start it, it sounds to me like the project can sometimes change a little bit.
Yes.
Things can develop. So has there ever been a point for you where maybe it's changed so much that now it's entirely different from what you had originally planned, or are they small forks in the road?
I've certainly started bodies of work that I just have really worked at and thought, this is going nowhere. It's not holding my interest. I'm not learning or growing from it, so I've left them. I think the most significant change was the one I mentioned about the quarries, going to photograph the people, because that's what I had always done. That was my thing. I photographed people, and switching to the landscape and just saying, wait a minute, it's this landscape that I'm so awed by. And what can I do with it that's different and hasn't been seen before? And that's another question I think photographers need to ask themselves. How can I stand out? What can I do that I haven't seen before? What can I do that sets me apart? I mean, in the commercial world, in the fine art world, in whatever world of image making you're in, standing out, standing apart really has to happen for you to advance. People have to kind of recognize. And yes, it's certainly sometimes been a stumbling block where people say, I see you jumped from this to this, but I'm able to talk about it. And I think that helps a lot. Did I answer your question?
No, it did.
Yeah.
It did. I guess really what I want to get at is that sometimes, say, I have an idea for a project, and as I start to work on it, it changes so much that I wonder, is this even the same thing that I was going for in the beginning? But I don't think that I've ever written it down in the way that you had described as coming up with the idea, time frame, the description of what this could be. And for me, trying to figure out, well, what's the end goal? Because it sounds like the end goal for your quarry project ended up being completely different than whatever it set out to be. So as a photographer, do you say to yourself, this is more interesting than what I had originally planned, or this is still worth it, or I can still make it work, I just have to tweak it?
I could give you another really good example. So I think what you have to do is say, this is the path I'm going to start down, and I'm absolutely open to where it goes. You have to say, I'm open to where it goes. And hopefully being open leads you to a happy accident that somehow reveals the project for you. So I'm always looking for that place, that happy accident that says, oh, it's not that, it's that. So for example, I wanted to do a film and photo project on racehorses. Grew up as a rider, and I suddenly wanted to go back and be near the horses, near the riders. I wanted to be back in that kind of milieu. So I set about to do that. And I wanted to make a 3-channel film that featured the horses and riders and the jockeys and just the way the world worked. So I found a way into that world and to people who would help me. And I was photographing on a race farm, photographing a jockey, where I would, again, like I did with Fandomania, I would basically bring a studio and create it where they were. It took a lot of effort, lighting, assistance, money, but that's what I wanted to do. So I was photographing the jockey, and I went out to do something, to get something. And in the field, I saw a racehorse that was wearing a blue, I forget what they're called, fly helmet, sort of. It's like this thing they put on their head, but they also use it in racing to keep the horses focused. I think everybody's familiar with them if they see it. So I saw that horse in the field, and it was very striking to me. So I asked the woman helping me, could we try bringing the horse in the barn where the jockey had just been? And I'm lit. I've got strobes. I've got a big black seamless. Actually, it was a cloth. Can we try bringing the horse in? And she said, sure, let's try. So we brought the horse in, and whammo, that was it. I was so struck, and I thought, that's what I've been waiting for. The jockeys are great, but the horses are fantastic. So then I did about 20 racehorses over in Northern California and Kentucky who were hooded in the studio, strobed, and I loved them. And so it was just a segue. It still fit into the project, but it was like an addition. It was sort of a gift but you have to be thinking and looking and making visual connections and saying, the jockey is amazing, the horse is amazing, and they're unified. You don't have a jockey without a horse. You don't have a horse without a jockey in the racing world. The connection is there. It's a smart connection. We managed to get it done with a lot of post-production and a lot of help.
When it comes to doing projects like this, the idea fascinates me because, for one, I've said this before, the dream project for me, like in high school, was following the band from like this, no name, the town, and then, I don't know, winning a Grammy, or following the team, which today would probably be the A's, who are doing nothing, but then they go on to win the World Series. Like that, to me, seems like such an amazing project, but that takes time. That takes a lot of time.
Yes.
And it's not known if that band is going to win that Grammy. If the A's they're not, but if they were going to win the World Series. But there's also this pressure of that we have to have an idea of exactly what it is that we want. And if we change our minds, then did we even really know what we wanted in the first place? And are we just flying by the seat of our pants?
I mean, I think you have to keep going.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know what the question is there, but I feel like there's, can you speak to that? And you went right for it.
Yeah, I think you have to go with, again, your instinct. I'm drawn to this. And you have to say, like now I've done at least 8 bodies of work. And so I've been in it a long time. And now I have to say, do I have the time, energy, and money to keep this going? Like when I was young, I'd say, yeah, I love that project. I'm just going and see where it takes me. So I think for young photographers, new photographers, people who just want some insight, you have to follow that or you don't have anything. You have to take the first step. And you have to, depending on the project, let it evolve. If it's a long-term documentary project, you have to say, I'm giving myself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and I'm going to see where it goes. In the meantime, I have to work. I have to bring in money. I have to meet people so I can eventually show this project. I think you have to allow it to be fluid, because going in with, sometimes you say, I'm going in with this set. Okay, I want to photograph this person. You're going to photograph that person. That's an in, that's an out. You're done. If you're taking on a longer project, you really have to just say, I'm going to keep my mind open to what might happen. I'm going to keep looking for different directions it might take me, things that will contribute and add to the project. And I'm going to think about where I might want the project to go. Sometimes that's very helpful to have an end goal. If I want a series of Instagram pictures, that's one thing. If you want to publish a book, you're going to need a lot more material for that. Do you need extra material? Do you want to look at archival imagery? I'm always looking. I'm a huge researcher. So different images, the way somebody might have done it, 10, 15, 20, 100 years ago. What's out there is there a kernel of information I can get that will add to my project? And sometimes you just go out walking the streets and looking for things that you want to shoot, and you keep doing that again and again, and you see how it evolves. It's really intuition and allowing it to evolve.
It's funny because I feel like my backstory is that I went to school for cinematography, fell in love with photography, went forward with that, thought the only way to make money in photography is wedding photography, did that for 10 years. And now I'm like, I'm done with that. I was never truly in love with it as much as I liked it. I loved that there was cake every day at work. That was wonderful.
Right.
But now I really feel like I'm trying to figure out who I am as a photographer. And last weekend was the last weekend of the Indiana State Fair. And I thought, I haven't been this whole month. I have to go at least once and take some photos. I've been here for 12 years. I've never taken photos of the state fair.
Right.
I have to go. So I went thinking, and the line to get into the state fair was far too long. I wanted to take photos of people just hanging out. Turns out the sun was going down. My options were running out. And I thought, I'm going to take photos of silhouettes that clearly say this is the fair, the Ferris wheel, people walking. And I quickly found that as light was going down and I had to change from what I wanted to get into, holy cow, how fascinating is it of all of these people eating ears of corn. People love ears of corn at the state fair. And I don't know if that's just an Indiana thing or every state fair. I don't know. But I thought that it was so fascinating, and Indiana has a history with corn. So I started taking those photos. But then as I was taking those photos, I thought to myself, maybe it was just the asshole brain of mine that was saying, who cares? Who cares about these photos? Who is this photo going to help? What is this photo going to change in somebody's mind? And you almost kind of step back and you say, yeah, who does care about this? But then I think about some other photographers whose work I love and enjoy. And I look at these photos and I think, if I would have thought of that idea, I would have thought, who cares? Nobody cares about this. One in particular is the work of David Hockney and his joiners. I think those are so fascinating, of such everyday, boring, interesting, or non-interesting subjects. And I think to myself, who cares? So when you go out and you go to take photos of jockeys or racehorses or people who are in love with their inanimate partners, or these images of the LA River, does that thought ever come into your brain? Like, who cares?
Absolutely. 100%. So what I have to say is, and I have to tell myself this too, I mean, cynicism is the biggest creativity killer. So if you start to say, who cares, which I absolutely do, you're dead in the water. You have to just say, I'm interested. I'm following my intuition. I'm following my path. Something happened for you where you had that moment where you said, I came to photograph for fair in a kind of more traditional way. I couldn't. So as a photographer, as a creative person, you have to say, what can I do? How can I transition? How can I segue to make this something that's interesting? Then you found yourself enjoying the process of shooting silhouettes, and the path you were on suddenly changed. And that's a very exciting thing. So you have to really fight against the who cares. It's like this, again, cynicism is the biggest creativity killer. The more you say, who cares? Nobody's going to want to see it. You're done. So you have to say, I care. And this is at least a new way for me to shoot. And maybe this is going to lead somewhere else. Or maybe in 5 years, I'm going to look at these pictures and there's going to be a great place for them. Or maybe, because I noticed also during the pandemic, I went back and looked through my dozens of hard drives and found work that was interesting to me now that wasn't then. So I think you have to just, again, say, I care, and I'm going to keep trying. If you need to make money off photography, the world is a little bit different now than it was. It's a harder place. If you want to make projects that are yours and you can establish a name and a reputation and you can gain a following, then you have to just put the who cares question way in the back of your mind and keep forcing yourself to move forward, keep forcing yourself to make better pictures, to challenge yourself the way you see things. That's kind of all you have. It really is. I have a better gauge of who cares sometimes because I show work in galleries and I rely on that a lot for my income. If nobody buys, then my question of who cares is a little more relevant. Nobody cared about that. So I can sort of gauge what sold extremely well and what didn't. And in a way, sometimes that's not accurate. It wasn't seen in the right place or the right people, but you do take those things into consideration as you move on.
Yeah.
But trying to keep the who cares out of your mind is really important, and just saying, I care about this and I'm just going to push myself. I'm here for this hour, 2 hours. I'm going to keep finding my way through.
So it's a blend, obviously, of having to listen to yourself, but then also getting feedback from others as well. So as you're developing a project, do you go to people and say, is this anything, and get their input?
I do. I have a few trusted friends. In the portrait magazine world, it was very different. You sent it to an editor, great, love it, or go do it again. You knew it worked because it ended up in the magazine, and then you got called again to do more. In the fine art world, which I live in a lot now, is I choose people the smartest people I can find, whose work I really respect. And we have a dialogue as soon as I'm ready. So you have to be ready. For example, with this large, really big film project I'm working on now, which will also hopefully have a photographic book component. So again, film and photography. The editor and I just got through the first 20 minutes of a 60-minute film, fine art film, 3-channel. And only after we really honed those first 20 minutes have I shown it to anybody. So you have to choose when you're ready to show something. You have to feel confident enough yourself to show. But yes, if you can find a few trusted people, that's critical.
So then how do we figure out what the proof of concept is before we show it to somebody? Because for me personally, if I had an idea for something, I want to go full steam ahead until it's finished. But then at that point, have I wasted my time if it doesn't resonate with anybody?
Not at all. Not at all. Do the whole project as you want to do it, as you feel, until you feel confident of the work. And then you show it, and you show it to a few people to get a few different perspectives. And you have a way to talk about the work and to, give the viewer a general sense of what you're doing. And it doesn't mean your project's done. It might be a new way to frame it. It might, meaning literally frame it, or reframe the project. You might it just might open up new ideas, like the project isn't done, or maybe it is. So having a few smart people to show either while you're in process or when you feel like you've got a substantial amount of work done is really important. You learn from your peers. You learn from people who, when we do our workshops, Dan and I teach, but the group is contributing so much to everybody's work that it's of equal importance. And that's true if you're working in your own studio, your own home, in a school, post-school. You just need to find a few people that you can talk it through with, and they can support you and keep your eyes open about what you're doing.
Do you think that it's possible to create a project on anything? It's just in how it's presented. Does that make sense?
Correct. I do. Yes. Wow. So, for example, I'm going to go back to the quarries or the LA River.
Yeah.
I was quite bored actually after a year photographing through the quarries. It was like fabulous to find one after I'd bushwhacked in 2 miles to find this abandoned, overgrown. Then there was like an initial extreme thrill. And then I would be photographing around and then I'm done, I'm leaving. I did that 100 times over 2 years. And I thought, yeah, the straight pictures, they're fine. I remember the excitement I felt, but it's kind of boring to shoot that. So how can I do something different? How can I start to make something? And I did look at David Hockney a lot in the beginning, a lot, because I'm a big fan of his work. I loved the way he stitched together. He was the starting off point. And when I talk about research, I really mean it's critical for me and maybe some of your listeners, because other people you don't want to copy them. You're not there to copy. You're there to say, I'm really attracted to that thing. How can that thing aid my own vision, my own work? I knew I wanted to do something, and it's trial and error. You have to spend time and thought. You have to really figure out how you're going to approach the subject through trial and error. Even now, I've got pictures on the walls that I say, what am I going to do with those? All right, I need some time. When I come in, I'm clear, and I can do something with them that maybe I'm afraid to do. It's new for me. Maybe I won't like it, but I got to do it. I have to try it. So trial and error, and just seeing if you can take what you've seen or what you're attracted to and make it your own somehow.
Yeah, I've said that a million times to photographers, how important it is to not only self-critique your own work and say, what is it that I like about this photo? Can I dive deeper into that? What is it that I don't like about this photo? Can I ignore these things? But also doing that to photographers who you admire, who you look up to. Look at the images that you like so that you can start to develop those skills. And not, as you said, not in a way to copy, but maybe there's a specific element. For me and David Hockney and those joiners, it's specifically just the overlapping and this weird separation of time and space, I guess, that I find
that's right.
so interesting.
That's right.
Not that I would take 1,000 photos of myself and do one of these, but it was definitely the technique. So this may seem like a wild question because I know that photography is very much a journey of self-discovery and exploration. But if a new photographer was coming to you and saying, hey, look, Elena, I don't know where to start. I understand manual mode. I get the technicals of my camera, but I really want to start taking images that matter. What would you say to them?
I would say, what matters to you? Make a list of things that really matter to you. Either they're personal or they're political or they're environmental. Like, what are you drawn to? What matters to you? I don't think if something doesn't matter to you, you can keep up the amount of time, energy, and effort it takes to make a complete project. So the burning question should be what matters. So you could take something like, well, the environment matters to me. Okay, that's big. What about the environment matters to you? Is it the burned down forests? Is it going back to Paradise, California, and shooting how that town, for example, has evolved since that fire in 2020? Is it the ocean? Are you a diver? Can you go underwater? So being as specific within these big realms, like a bubble that you're kind of entering, I think it always helps to start. That's not necessarily true. Some people are very drawn to personal issues. This is my issue. I'm going to explore. We're in this big age now of people telling their own stories and revealing their lives in various ways through photography or art making. I think if you're a new photographer, you have to maybe start with the personal. And that's not only about something that might be in your family, but what issues are you drawn to? There's a lot to say now. There's a lot going on in the world. It's a really rich time. But you have to take little steps. Again, kind of making a list. Well, what would that include? What of the issues I'm interested in, or personal or political or whatever? What's my first way in? What's the first thing I'm going to explore? What other areas does this touch upon that I could also maybe explore? What techniques do I want to use? How do I want to shoot this? You have to go with your gut and go with what you want to say. I think that's the easiest way in. When I first started, the first book I did, I had this issue. I had this enormously life-changing experience of being diagnosed with cancer at a young age. So it was really important to me to go back and hear what other people were going through. That was an easy segue. It wasn't an easy book to produce, but it was an easy segue. So if your listeners have anything in their lives they want to explore or a burning interest, you got to just find your way in and take the first steps.
That was beautiful and something that each one of us can do. But now I'm going to ask the hard question. Looking back at your body of work, the various projects that you have done, as a culmination of all of them, how would you answer that question of what matters to you? What ties them all together?
Well, I can tell you two bodies of work that I am always going back to and that were very important to me. And one would be Still Lovers and one would be Empire Falling. So I think because Still Lovers maybe was such a shocking exploration for me, initially shocking, and then it became somewhat normal. But I think just having entree into that world that was so unlike my own world was very instrumental, very important. And Empire Falling because it signified the trajectory of my work. It signified something radically different for me. And so it doesn't mean that I don't want to shoot portraits again. Now, 10 years later, I'd love to shoot portraits. So thinking of ways I can incorporate maybe portraits and landscape, somehow keep the two in some way connected. I don't yet know how. But sorry, did I answer your question?
Yes, and I'm confident that you will figure it out to be able to bring those portraits and landscapes together.
We'll see.
Because what I find so fascinating about your work is that it's not just straight photography. You are so willing to try new things, new mediums, new ideas. And as you said, I mean, go through old hard drives of images and go through all of them and see new ideas from photos that you had taken years ago, decades ago.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's normal for a lot of photographers. I think that they shoot the photo, they edit it, and then they're done with it. So to be able to go back and look at it with fresh eyes and be open to try new things with it is fascinating. And I'm glad to have had this conversation with you today and be able to ask these questions because honestly, I feel a little bit lost in my photography and I feel like you really helped kind of draw me in. No, not draw me in. You threw out a lifeline and you're like, look, a lot of this can help kind of clear up some of the ideas that I had. So I appreciate you there. But before I let you go, I know that listeners are going to be interested in you, in your work, and to be able to find out where we can learn more about you online. So where can we do that?
Okay, I have two places, actually. One is my regular website. So that's elenadorfman.com. And that features my projects. So my fine artwork, my books, some special projects I've done, they're all there. And on Instagram, it's Dorfman Elena. I also do workshops, teaching workshops with Dan Milner, who I think probably some of your listeners know. And
Very
you
well.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we teach together every year, usually in some exotic location. We've been doing Albania, and next year we're doing Jordan and Lebanon, which we're super excited about. So to follow our workshop work, that's at Instagram, Wide Angle Creative, and also the same website, wideanglecreative.com. So you can see what we've done and the projects that people have created. We focus a lot not only on individual pictures and storytelling, but lots of participants want to make books. So we bring them through the book process while we're traveling and having fun. Two kind of different personalities there, but I'm fine living with two different personalities. So they join, they find a place in the middle to meet. So feel free to reach out.
I said it at the beginning, creative engine. I feel she is. So great. I had 3 big takeaways from this episode. The first one was just to follow your instincts. I don't know about you, but I often have a hard time listening to my gut, even though it has a lot to say. I think that we love the idea of doing something like a daily photo project, but what are we going to shoot? How are we going to carry this camera with me everywhere? Or does the world really need a photo project of what is in people's refrigerators? Next time when your gut says something, listen. If the answer is yes, just do it. Takeaway number 2 was to find an easy in. When you're doing a photo project with a bit more planning, try to choose an idea with an easy in. Maybe you know somebody, or you have access to something, or it's already a part of your life. Don't try to make your first real attempt at a photo project something like portraits of snow leopards in the Himalayas. Don't make it so big. Just try to build that momentum, get a quick win, and then keep going. Grow from there. And lastly, the idea of presenting a project brief to yourself. Now, I don't know about you, but again, if I have an idea, I get super excited about it. I will spend maybe an hour or two doing research and creating a whole project page within Notion. And then when I go to, tell my wife or, a friend about this project, when I finally hear the words that are coming out of my mouth, suddenly I realize that maybe it was a less than fully formed idea. So creating this project brief and delivering it to yourself, I think, is a great way to better understand the idea and work out any potential speed bumps. I would love to hear your biggest takeaway in the Beginner Photography Podcast community. And while you're there, remember how I told you at the beginning of the episode, I'm working on something new that'll help you to solidify your understanding of each episode, as well as encourage you to take action? Well, when you come on into the Beginner Photography Podcast community to share your thoughts or your biggest takeaway from an episode, you're also going to see an individual episode action plan to download. I'm calling these a Grasp and Grow Photo Action Plan. Love alliterations. So last week's episode with Ellie McKinney, here is just a sample of what would be in her action plan. It would be the main photo lessons shared by Ellie, things like the power of passion, mastering light and composition, and embracing authenticity, along with the action plan items for you to, take action on. Things like defining your goals in photography, investing in the right education, how to network and collaborate with others, and prioritizing customer service and developing a marketing strategy. My hope is that when guests share something and it sparks an idea for you, you can then grab this Grasp and Grow photo action plan to, again, solidify your understanding of what happened within the interview, the main lessons shared, as well as what are the next steps? How do you start to get where the guest is, if that's where it is that you want to go? They took certain steps that they shared in their interview, and this is those steps they took to get there. So If you do the same thing, you're going to start being on the right track, right? So take passive listening and turn it into action taking with the Grasp and Grow photo action plans. Again, totally free. Just go ahead and when you come on into the Beginner Photography Podcast community, when you leave your comment on each week's episode, you can download it right there. So if you haven't joined our free and private photo community yet, you can do so by heading over to beginnerphotopod.com/group now. That is it for this week. Thank you so much again for joining me today on this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.